For the introductory episode of this new series, I will be going over a game introduced to me by my friend X Grimjakuri, and that game is Dark Souls. No, wait, that's not right. The game is called Ashen, and it is essentially a Dark Souls clone, which was released in December of 2018 by a studio named A44. Granted, Ashen comes with a completely different aesthetic, and it's nowhere near as complex as Dark Souls. It is most certainly a clone. The combat style, Dark Souls inspired. The plot, Dark Souls inspired. Instead of bonfires, you have ritual stones. Instead of Estus flasks, you have crimson gourds. And instead of souls, you have Scotia. If you die, you drop your Scotia, and should you fail to retrieve it before you die again, they are lost, just like with souls. Despite being a Dark Souls clone, however, Ashen has a much lighter fill. It's not as dismal. You don't play an undead. There's no hollowing. You do, however, aim to bring the light back to the world, reviving it for future generations, which is basically the concept behind rekindling the flame. Even the game's name, Ashen, seems nearly a direct tie-in to Dark Souls. As for how Ashen was received by the community, it seems fairly evenly split. Some people feel it's a worthless copy, an insult to Dark Souls, if you will, and others feel it is actually a worthy clone. The consensus is unanimous though. Ashen is heavily inspired by the Dark Souls franchise. Before we delve into the game design of Ashen, I made a decision to compare it to Dark Souls. Now, this doesn't necessarily make for a fair review, but considering how many gamers know the Dark Souls games and how heavily Ashen was influenced by Dark Souls series, I figured using it as a reference point would help iron out the Ashen experience. This is not going to be a video where I say one is better or worse than the other, but I will make mention of how one may have contributed to or subtracted from the game experience, and how certain things are the same between the two. The world of Ashen is a true open world, much more in the style of Bethesda games than that of the Dark Souls franchise. Like I mentioned in a previous video, the world of Dark Souls is vertical as well as horizontal. But here, the world of Ashen is barely vertical, and it's mostly horizontal. If you've ever played Destiny, think of that style of world. Now, when we consider the, let's say, immersiveness of the world, it is very different from Dark Souls. This is mostly due to the cartoonish aesthetic of the game. Though Ashen does feel like a living world, it's true, there's no realism, and that separates the player from the intensity in a way Dark Souls didn't. One of the things Ashen did was to provide a sense of progression in a different way from Dark Souls. You are the founder of a camp called Vagrant's Rest, and if you proceed through the various main and side missions, the camp gets built into a town. More NPCs move in with skills that aid the player in greater capacities. Villagers move in with no purpose other than to provide life to the area. This is the main hub of Ashen, as Firelink or Majula was to the Dark Souls game. But in Ashen, the hub actually seems alive. There are several characters you meet throughout the game, and they have side quests that you complete towards your own personal progression. One thing that initially threw me off was the fact that nobody has a face, except for certain enemies. It's like a game designed by mannequins for mannequins. I'm joking, of course, as really this makes it unique in a way. Well, as unique as a clone can be. Many of the characters you meet have side missions you can do as you go through the game, which unlocks better stuff, gear, upgrades, and the like. The graphics remind me more of Project Spark or Fable than anything else. They obviously weren't designed to rival Dark Souls, and that's a good thing. This helps give Ashen its own identity. Earlier I called it cartoonish, but that's not quite right. I think it would be better referred to as stylized. In an age where 8-bit styled games are making a return, Ashen capitalizes on the fact that games don't need to look like real life. And this is great, really. There are even times when the scenery is breathtaking. Just watch the footage here and you'll see what I mean. There's no complicated soundtrack, but there is always an ambient music that plays. It's understated and never overrules the combat sounds. Speaking of which, combat sounds good. I never noticed anything wrong with the sound anywhere in the game, but at the same time, nothing jumped out at me as amazing. It works though, and is seemingly perfectly balanced for the entire experience. As for the controls, have you played Dark Souls? If yes, you know the controls. If not, well, then the controls are exactly the same as Dark Souls. That being said, the controls are good. It's a system that works, nothing is complicated. You have light attacks, heavy attacks, blocking and shield bashing via the bumpers and triggers. You have your run, jump, interact, and item use on the ABXY buttons. It's simple, it's smooth, and it works. Now, as for the difficulty of Ashen, no, it's not as hard as Dark Souls. It's not easy though. Fall damage will kill you, though it does seem to be more lenient than Dark Souls was in this regard. Enemies, even standard ones, can get a few good hits in and destroy your health bar. Also, Ashen chose to focus more on teamwork. Some things in the game require a teamwork mechanic to open a door or scale certain walls. If you don't have a friend to co-op with, you're given an AI companion to assist you. This helps a lot without making the game absurdly easy. There is also another feature of this game which allows you to start a new game with lower starting hit points and stamina called Children of Cisna. This mode became unlocked after defeating the third area boss of the game and opens up a new save slot. This is basically Ashen's hardcore mode, and it doesn't follow the New Game Plus formula of the series from which it's derived. Now, bosses are a challenge. They can sometimes one-hit kill you, or use a combo to nearly instantly kill you. They have huge HP pools that take a long while to drain down, and they also have multiple damage phases, getting more difficult as the fight progresses. But they aren't numerous. If compared to Dark Souls, as I've done this whole video, Ashen is easy. Now, again, the lore of this game is very limited. You only know the story through the opening cutscene and the dialogue with NPCs throughout the game world. There's no books or tablets to pick up with history. There's no catalog of creatures or enemies. In this regard, the game is vastly removed from the game that inspired it. Dark Souls has a whole lot of lore. Ashen does not. Now, I don't want to give spoilers, so I will keep this section of the story brief. But the story here is something similar to Dark Souls. You have to recover something to awaken the world to light, much akin to kindling the flame. The story is good, if not completely original. It's compelling, if short. For me, the focus of the game wasn't so much on the story as on the player's journey. What's the difference, you may ask? The story is set, the journey is unknown. It's the experiences along the way that make the game fun, not the overarching story that drives the world. When it comes to the multiplayer, this is where Ashen really shines compared to Dark Souls. I never had an issue with connecting to my friend, and there was no complicated way of doing it. Seems the only stipulation is that you both to be on the same part of the story, but it isn't locked to regions. An area boss doesn't have to be alive for you and your friend to connect. Just be in the same area of the map and the same story progression, and you'll appear in a shared world. A shared world. Progress made is shared. You don't have to kill the boss, go back, summon a friend, and kill it again so that both people get the credit. I had a very solid co-op experience in Ashen, and everything I did in the game, I did in the company of a friend. And that's the extent of the multiplayer. Unlike Dark Souls, there's no PvP, there are no invaders, there are no covenants that will invade the game space of a rival covenant. I actually preferred this, as the invasions in Dark Souls were one of the most infuriating features of the game. The first, and hopefully not the last, DLC for Ashen released in September of 2019, and leads the player across the sea to the Night Storm Isle, a small desolate rock with bubbling pools of green liquid and massive bottomless holes. Your quest here is to find a woman who's lost her child. Unlike the mainland of the game, this DLC's map seems to be mostly underground. It features new enemies, new NPCs, and a new evil that needs its ass kicked. I'm excited to delve into this new DLC, and if it's anything like the main game, it will be a fun adventure. World design and graphics obviously carry over from the main game's design, which that might seem as a given, but when you consider that Fallout New Vegas was supposed to be a DLC for Fallout 3, it's obvious that not all studios follow that train of thought. The A44 developers have said this DLC is playable at any point throughout the game without injuring story timelines, but they also said that you can wait until after the Yokel side quest for extra lore. To access the DLC, it's a short jaunt from the Whisper's Ritual Stone to the shore, where you speak with an NPC named Cole, who then offers to ferry you to Nightstorm Isle. In summary, Ashen is a great game. It's fun, it's engaging, and yes, it is a clone of Dark Souls. Through the entire playthrough, my friend and I, who were both huge Dark Souls fans, couldn't stop pointing out the similarities or using Dark Souls references. We always referred to the currency as souls, and half the time we said bonfire instead of ritual stone. There's nothing wrong with a clone if that clone is done well, and Ashen is done well, with enough in way of differences to make it almost unique. It is a short game requiring very few hours to complete, and at the time of editing this video I have put maybe 10 hours into Ashen and we're at the last area of the game. But it's been nothing but fun. One of the best aspects, in my opinion, is Vagrant's Rest. The town grows as you progress. It thrives as you thrive. It's a tangible change in the game world that represents the progress you've made, which is so unlike Dark Souls, where you may get an NPC to stop by Firelink or Majula, but there's no visible change to the world. Ashen is certainly an experience to play. That being said, I think I'll give Ashen a solid score of 8 out of 10. It's well worth playing, even if you don't like the Dark Souls games. And as always, I ask that you consider liking this video, and maybe subscribing to my channel. I also stream every Saturday around 7 p.m. Central Standard Time, although I stream PvP games mostly, and I stream randomly throughout the week. Stop in, say hi, make some suggestions for videos or games to play. We can discuss games, or we can even play around together. With that, I hope to catch you next time, and take care.